Hi, History 10 students. This is the Friday session, which was intended to be a mixture between our History 10 students and History 20 students. And the initial goal was to be able to generate some topics of discussion, use this as sort of a general catch-all where you could show up and in live, real time, have your questions answered, maybe generate some discussion, look at specific events or specific assignments that you want some assistance with. The reality is it hasn't been well attended, the Friday sessions in particular. And so I'm looking at making some changes, but I always want to incorporate your perspective into the changes we make. So I talked about it with some of the students that are here before I started recording, and we tossed around an idea of perhaps changing the Friday session, me more blocking off some periods of time and making up a quick little calendar, something that's very easy to use. Literally just click into a website and then type in your name and pick a date and time that you want to meet with me. And that might be of more value to you so that we can do some very targeted one-on-one looks into a specific event, a specific assignment, um, you know, questions that you would like answered or things that you want to discuss. And if that is of more value to the majority of you and it encourages more contact with me and more sort of live engagement and helps you meet your educational goals for this History 10 class, then that's what I want to do. I think I'd like to keep the Wednesday session because the Wednesday session is just us, a little bit more focused on specific content, specific events, and things that are either in the assignments or leading to the assignments or reviewing things that we have discussed. So I think we'd like to keep those Wednesday sessions for now. But what I'm going to do and what students have, sort of agreed is probably a good idea, is I'll just put up a quick little survey, a quick little Google form, just to ask you what your preference would be and if you have any other ideas for how you want to use these live sessions, because I want to make them available for you. I love meeting with students. I love talking with students. And but the reality is if you've done online classes before, you're probably finding that this is a bit of a common theme, is that these live sessions are available and the teachers are there and we have some content and things planned, but they're typically not that well attended. And I think there's value in them, but I also can read the writing on the wall, and I want you to feel that that these are worth your time. And our little brainstorming session here has kind of indicated that it might be perceived as more worth your time if it's very, very focused on what you're doing at this point. And that also acknowledges, it may not be ideal, because I do think there's lots of value in larger group discussions and students interacting and using their microphones and whatnot. I also definitely understand and can sympathize with the idea that this online learning and transition to online learning for many of you has been, it's a new thing. It can be uncomfortable if you are in a large group session where you don't know anybody. It's not like sitting in a classroom in a physical school where maybe you've got 4 or 5 friends that you're very comfortable talking with, or a teacher that can help draw out discussion in a physical space. That's much more difficult in an online environment, and it may be more uncomfortable for students. So the long and short of it is, I want to do what's best for you. So I'm going to ask you what you think is best for you, and then we're going to maybe make some changes to the way we do the Friday meetings in order to make it easier for you to meet your goals for the class, whatever those may be. But today, I just want to go through briefly some of the current materials with regard to kind of in post-Renaissance. A lot of it is sort of beginning of Renaissance, post-Renaissance, age of discovery is, or age of conquest. There's lots of different ways that it's been pitched in the past. And when I was growing up, it was all about Christopher Columbus in 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue and basically discovered this brand new continent. And Christopher Columbus, what a brilliant navigator, discovering the new land and populating and whatnot. And the movement, the just movement had recently started, where you can't say you discovered a land that people have been living on for thousands and thousands of years, where millions of people already exist and have cultures and have societies and have trade and have basically relation with the land since time immemorial. You can't say you discovered that. You could say you explored it, but you can't say you discovered it like it wasn't a thing before you were there, because as we well know, all through the Americas, there were indigenous populations that have been living there since time immemorial. From scientifically speaking, since a time where continents were joined and they could literally walk across from human origins across the world and come over. So if you want to say someone discovered it, you really have to go a hell of a lot further back in human history to actual migration from first peoples across what used to be a continent, which eventually was separated eventually separated into a space where there was gaps filled with water. So that idea, I think, is more the generally accepted, social view of the conquest era, is that it wasn't discovered, it was explored, and it was visited for the first time by white people, is essentially what happened. And along with that came a lot of very, very, very bad things that probably didn't get enough play in history until relatively recently, in the last, say, 100 years or so. History tends to be rewritten or written and rewritten by the victors. That's a phrase you'll hear a lot just in sort of society, and that's very true. A lot of the history resources, a lot of accounts from generations past and eras past were written from a white perspective, an Anglo perspective, and distributed to other people of like skin color, language, culture, basically describing how awesome their conquests were and developing these frankly racist ideals as to what actually happened back there, but in that period of time. So hopefully we're getting better. Hopefully we're doing a better job of realizing that there are different worldviews out there. There are different perspectives on all of these events and these eras of time. And with this access to experience, tradition, oral history, things that we maybe didn't give enough emphasis to before, hopefully we're building a more holistic idea as to what happened and why it happened and why human beings need to be responsible as we move forward to make sure that atrocities like that never happen again. And let's be clear, there were atrocities. The indigenous peoples of America, and when I say America, I mean up from Inuit civilizations down through Plains indigenous, down to through Mexico and South America, indigenous populations down there wiped out. Sometimes on purpose, for conquest of gold and resources and slavery. Sometimes semi-unintentionally, maybe, where diseases passed to indigenous populations that had never been seen before and that human bodies in the Americas were not prepared to handle. Smallpox, measles, things like that eradicated literally 90% of the population. That's a stunning figure. For a population to be reduced via conflict and primarily disease, to lose 90% of your population is just a stunning number. It's hard for me to comprehend how many million people were killed, and that the primary objective of the discoverers was not to discover and explore new land and enjoy it and make strong relationships with the people, although that did happen in many cases. But ultimately, the larger goal for a lot of nations was bringing back wealth, was bringing back people to enslave and sell, was to conquer land for a nation so that they had access to resources, land, people that they could use to further make their nation more powerful and more wealthy. And human history just plays that out over and over and over again. And it's a sad thing, but it is something that it's important we understand, and it is something that we need to analyze critically, and it's something that we need to use moving forward to ensure that we move forward in a better manner than we started. So if we're looking at the age of conquest or the age of imperialism or colonialism, we're talking about essentially starting in the late 1400s. So that would be the 15th century, late 15th century, and moving all the way through essentially into 1800s. Colonialism still happens. I mean, there's still colonies all over the world, but the real impetus and the real beginning of that would have been the late 1400s. And yes, Columbus was a big figure in that time, and he wasn't stupid. He wasn't don't listen to everything you hear. He didn't discover America by the Americas by discover. I even say it. He didn't end up in the Americas by accident. Nobody sails across an ocean without having a plan and without being able to use technology at the time to navigate. That doesn't happen. He wasn't some bumbling idiot who just took off on a ship and accidentally ended up in America. So put that one to bed early. Let's just go through sort of the main areas of conquest and the main nations that were responsible for it. At this point in Europe, and we're talking about Europe here, we'll expand a little bit beyond, but that's going to be our focus right now. So if I just zoom in on our map in Europe for a bit here, there's just a couple things to note here. So here's the big players at the time with regard to colonialization. We had France, more or less here. We had Britain, we had Germany, we had Austria-Hungary, but they were typically focused on areas that they could get to that were relatively easy. So Africa, a huge continent. Africa is so much bigger than you think it is. They were already moving into these areas and exploiting them for gold, and there was a lot of gold, there was a lot of silver, there were spices, there were a lot of human beings that were enslaved and literally brought back to these European countries and sold as slave labor. So there was colonization and exploitation happening in these areas already, and there were some sort of global powers there at that point, and certainly. Britain and in Western Europe was a very strong nation, was an area of strong and wealthy nations. Down here in what is Turkey, sort of around Turkey, was something Ottoman Empire. If you've ever heard that term before, the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire was quite powerful, and they kind of controlled things down here. This is Greece down here, and this is what is modern day Turkey, and there was quite a bit of power there. There was a lot of power down here we're no longer in Europe, now we're in Southeast Asia. There was a lot of power in this area here as well, and Asian ships and whatnot. And we'll discuss that as well, because I think that's a part that's really not as well known for us in Canada. And I, for certain, it's been a long time since I took history classes, but for certain, I never learned anything about some of the major explorers and traders and fleets of the day that were from and operating in the Indian Ocean or in these areas here, around Saudi Arabia and considered Far Eastern and Middle Eastern countries. A lot of what we learned about was over here, right? Because I guess at the time it was determined that this was more applicable to us because we're talking about the, again, quotes, discovery of the Americas and how it led to where we are today in Canada and the US and North America. So we didn't learn a whole lot about what was in here, but there's amazing things that happened there and things that deserve attention. So you probably watched the videos. I don't want to rehash everything in the videos, but at this time, with advances in technology and the way that you could navigate, and ships, the way that ships were built and the way that they had the sails and the way that they could provision the ships and store food, and now they were prepared. Now people in general in these areas were able to navigate longer distances at sea. And it had happened before. It had happened. Vikings had made landing in Newfoundland, and so on. So it had happened in the past, but it was a heck of a lot more dangerous, and it wasn't as well recorded, so we don't know as much about it. But during this period, the idea was essentially, there's a lot of land out there that we didn't really know existed before, or think existed, or we had some ideas, but we weren't entirely sure. And our goal at the time is to do two things. Essentially, is to establish is to exploit for wealth or to gather wealth for a country. And because in a lot of these nations in Western Europe, Catholicism and the Christian Church was extremely powerful and extremely important to the monarchs and rulers at the time, they wanted to collect Christians as well, whether that be by establishing, Christianity in new lands, basically spread the religion. So these two things drove a lot of the exploration in the past, because it's expensive. You have to build ships, you have to provide for them, you have to have multiples, you have to have fleets. You can't just essentially send one ship across, and you have to be able to establish routes to get things back if you find things. So it was an expensive undertaking. It wasn't the sort of thing that your common noble could do. So at this point, some trade had already been established, quite a bit actually, between Western Europe and areas in Middle and Southeast Asia, and it had been very profitable for both ends. And the idea is we can continue to expand on that profitability if we can find other areas and other people that we can trade from or trade with, or somehow mine resources and get them back to home. So that drove a lot of this stuff. And it's funny, the two sort of most notable figures from Western Europe when it comes to the age of exploration and conquest are Da Gama and Christopher Columbus. And the funny thing is they're both Italian, and neither one of them have Italian names. And sorry, Da Gama wasn't. Who am I thinking of? John Cabot. Sorry, I was thinking of John Cabot. Da Gama also was as well, but he wasn't Italian. Anyway, they didn't have any luck. They wanted to explore. They wanted to be part of this exploration movement, and they had nothing but trouble trying to convince kings, queens, people, monarchs with power and money to pay for them to do this. So that's the big thing. They need money, and they had more success over here in what you might hear referred to as sort of Iberian nations. It's mostly down here by Portugal. So the green one is Spain, and the orange one is Portugal. So in these areas, they had a little bit more luck. The idea of Catholicism and basically collecting Christians for the Catholic cause and nation was particularly potent here. So the king and queen, and the names are escaping me. I think Queen Isabel and I can't remember the king or prince's name. They did agree to fund some exploration, Christopher Columbus, etc. And so that's really how it started. And they were not wealthy nations. They really weren't real powers in Western Europe at this time, but they did see an opportunity for gold and Christians. So these explorations started, and what ended up happening is sort of the things that you remember being taught from history. Christopher Columbus makes it across to these were the Canary Islands, Jamaica, things like that. I don't know. There's a misconception of some students that Columbus landed up here in North America. No, over here, like way down south, and found indigenous populations, found sugar, found gold, silver, particularly in these areas in South America in Mexico, South America, Central America. We'll consider those areas now. And it was huge. It was a huge discovery. They had a huge discovery. I keep saying it. It was a discovery for them because they hadn't seen it before. But the land and the resources of the indigenous population were there. So I just want to be clear about that. And there was an explorer named Magellan who didn't make it home, but was the first one to actually make it all the way around from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And at that point, there was something called the Panama Canal, where you could skip between them right here, all the way around the south tip of South America. I think most of us have no idea how long that is, how long a journey that is, and how difficult that journey would have been, and how frightening that would have been for everybody to undertake that. Anyway, Magellan did that. Christopher Columbus gets a lot of the attention because in 1492 made it here down into the Caribbean, and found that there were indigenous populations. There was so much wealth, particularly here in areas of Incan and Mayan civilization. Gold and the use of gold and milling gold and processes for purifying and mining gold and silver and other precious metals that didn't even exist in or were being used in Western Europe at the same time. But there were advances, there were technologies, but really there were people, and there was golden resources, and there was spice, and there was sugar, which was a real rarity across the ocean. It was probably almost worth the same as gold and the gold dust in that period of time. So there is definitely opportunity to exploit, because Portugal and Spain were the countries that funded these explorations. There, excuse me, the explorers, more people came over, and they did form trade relationships with locals, and they did intermarry and try to establish trading in those places. But as it always starts, relatively innocently, it led to conquest. It led to the conquistadors and all sorts of troops and whatnot coming over, and under the veil of exploring and establishing trade relationships and whatnot, annihilated civilizations and exploited them. And had the way that they did things is they took resources that were there and shipped them home. They enslaved people that were there and got them to mine resources, and then took the resources home. And they basically ran things the way they wanted to run things. So they cut down forests, shipped the timber home. They cleared land and planted sugar for refining, and had enslaved people mine or refine the sugar and mine materials and gold, and do what they needed to do and bring it back to land. So it was, they were exploiting, they were subjugating, they were murdering, they were destroying civilization, but they were bringing a lot of gold home, and Portugal and Spain became actually quite wealthy. And when that happens in one place, other nations and other nobles and monarchs want the same thing for theirs. So now you see a real increase in the amount of ship traffic across the ocean, and leading to battles and imperialization and colonization all over. If you could grab a section of land for Britain and declare it a section of land and put the flag on it, that's now yours. It doesn't matter that there were people there before, and it's not yours. But military might, and then they enslave people, they establish colonies all over the world. Things that had never happened before, because the ability to travel to create these colonies was more limited before this period of time. So the cross ocean, cross Atlantic travel became huge, and all sorts of different nations were sending all their ships and trying to exploit whatever they could over here in the Americas. So that's happening on that front, but also things are happening over here, which is stuff we didn't hear about as much when I was a kid. And one of the really interesting crash course videos that's linked in there is about Shanghai and Degamo. And frankly, I don't think I'd heard those names before, but especially not when I was young. But if you look at the fleet that Shanghai had, it was massive, and the technology, the ship technology, and navy navy prowess in the seas was stunning, and it was frankly, it was quite more advanced than what was happening in Western Europe. But they tended to stick to these areas, and Shanghai was basically a very, very experienced, very, very strategic, intelligent, capable leader of this I don't even know what to call it, a navy, but essentially a fleet of ships. But they were more focused on setting up a presence in the water, and at this point, the Chinese emperor was very rich, and the people supporting or sponsoring Shanghai and his fleet were very rich, were very wealthy, and wanted more than they wanted to go and exploit nations for wealth and resources. They had lots of that. What they wanted was the world to know that we are a power, we are a thing. So essentially, they were kind of establishing trade relationships and showing off at the same time. And other nations in Europe saw this happening, and saw all the wealth in China. And at that time, it wasn't even reasonable for any nation, I think, to think that they could just go in there and subjugate China and steal their resources. So they had to go the other way, which is establishing trade. So they go to great lengths to explore this area, reasonably well trafficked already at that point, but to make relationships with the Shanghai and with nations in Southeast Asia in order to basically get your foot in the door so that you can trade and get some of these awesome things that we've never seen before. And Shanghai was also interested in bringing back things that they didn't have in China, like such as certain animals, breeds and species of animals that they didn't have, things like that. But it was more about that and establishing a presence and establishing an opportunity to trade if Western Europe nations sucked up enough, basically, than it was about finding land that they'd never seen before and colonizing and whatnot. So that's an area that I don't think got a lot of attention when I was growing up, but you definitely need to be aware of it because from what I've read, it was a very, very significant, very, very significant travel and fleet or flotilla or whatever you want to call it of the time. Da Gama was one that I hadn't heard about a lot about either, and Da Gama did a lot of work in here and also in here, and the things I've read indicate that he was sort of akin to an early pirate. I mean, he was sort of an official fleet of his own. I believe it was Spanish. I have to check on that, but as opposed to having a colonial focus, it seems like a lot of attention and time was spent during the voyages taking what he could take, and also but attacking other ships and taking what they what they had tried to bring back from Americas or tried to bring back from Southeast Asia, and basically pirating and taking on that sort of role. But significantly enough, and with enough prowess and strategy that is now recognized as being a major player during that area. So without drawing too fine a point on it, I think that it needs to be noted that this was a time where the world both got smaller and got bigger. The early explorers had some idea, from a Western perspective, they had some idea of how large the world was. They knew that the world was round. They didn't think it was flat at that point. They more or less knew the world was round, but they had no concept of how far it was to the Americas, and also that on the other side of Americas, there's another ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and it's it's relatively far away from there back to where they were in Western Europe. So they knew the world was round, and they knew that they were going to find something when they took off across the Atlantic. But I don't think they had much of a clue as to how far away it was, how large the land mass was, how many people. They had no clue about the indigenous populations and how many people and what resources and what societies and civilizations lived there. And I don't believe at the time they knew until Magellan sailed all the way from Atlantic to Pacific, how big it was on the other side as well, how much land and territory and ocean there is, and how much ocean there really is. It's quite stunning. And forget about Australia, because I don't think they were in the fold much at all. There was an indigenous population in New Zealand and Australia for sure, but it wasn't an area that was under sort of that exploration at the time. But what happened in the end is any of the exploration of the Americas, whether or not nations intended to form symbiotic relations, I doubt it. What ended up happening is after an initial period of sort of meeting and some setting up some trade posts and like say intermarrying and weaving themselves into the existing cultural fabric of the Americas, essentially conquest happened. Disease and slaughter on unparalleled levels. Say estimates are routinely say 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas was killed. That's a stunning number. Resources were exploited. The resources that were already mined, people were exploited to both be brought back and sold as slave labor, but also to be enslaved in their lands to mine their materials and refine their materials, and then that was essentially brought back to the land as well. Colonies are established all up through the Americas so that nations from Europe and area had a land mass and had foothold and had flags on the ground and people on the ground and troops on the ground. So it was really a global perspective now, as opposed to your colonization being kind of local and where you could easily get to either via land or shorter ship routes. Now there's a whole area that had been previously unrecognized by Western Europe where colonization was occurring. Whenever a colonization occurs, subjugation of people occurs, and exploitation occurs. So this was an era where it really exploded. And I think that's a a reasonable description of what happened. We'll go into more detail on some of those things in the course, but as an overview, I think that those are things that you need to know as you move through the upcoming assignments. I'll sign off there, but I just wanted to mention again that I'm only an email away. I really want to do my best to help you. I'm still expecting several assignments from people on the 1.5 Marxism and or sorry, but yeah, Marxism, and that was the big assignment from Unit 1, and I gave a lot of detail, as much detail as I could in that assignment, showing what I want and how you can best demonstrate for me that you can make an argument, back it up with facts, and not just copy and paste or type out facts and dates and names. That's not of value to us. We need to analyze Marxism. We need to analyze ideologies, and we need to be able to compare and contrast. I think is the big thing, and you need to be able to provide evidence from the resources or from your own research that indicates you understand it and that you can back up your point, and use the denominators for the question and the rubric to help you with that. If a question is worth 3 points, you should probably have an argument, a central argument that you make, or a viewpoint that you make, and you should probably have 2 or 3 little things you can point at to say, this is how I can back this up based on the materials I have or what I've researched. So just be careful about that, particularly about that first assignment, or sorry, the Unit 1 1.5 assignment, which is the big one. And then we're at the end of the Renaissance unit for people who are moving with the course calendar. The big assignment in the Renaissance unit is one of 2 options, one about the Medicis and architecture and how to lay out a sort of a Renaissance city, and the other one is more about the specific people of importance of the Renaissance, which we've structured as a sort of a bachelor/bachelorette game where you describe in a sort of a modern context, the bachelors or bachelorettes or however you want to phrase it. So that was more of a humanistic perspective or based on figures, whereas the other one is based on architecture and designing city design, because those are the 2 focuses we took in the Renaissance unit. That's the big one for Unit 2, and that's not due until next Wednesday or so, and I gave like a week of time for that. So if you're putting in 2 hours every day like you should, my expectations for that assignment, that final assignment in Unit 2, either if you chose option 1 or option 2, there should be a significant amount of evidence and good critical thought that goes into that. And if you have questions about that, if you're struggling, try to isolate exactly what it is that you're struggling with, the idea or the concept or the event or whatever it is, so that I can help you out. And I'm certainly happy to do that. I'm only an email away, but do please try to avoid sending emails that say, like, I don't get this, this being Renaissance, or I don't get assignment 1. That's not specific enough. You have to prove that you've read through it, you've gone through the resources, and then isolate a section that you don't understand. Like, I don't know what this word means, or I don't know what you're asking here, or I read about Medici, but I don't really understand why he did this, or what he did for this person, or what he did for this group of artists. Those are very specific targeted questions that I can work with you with and help you really quickly. I always get a little leery when students say, I don't get assignment 4, because usually it means they kind of just skimmed over it and want me to, tell them exactly what to write. I don't want to do that. That doesn't help you. That being said, I do want you to come to me if you feel like you're struggling, because I want to help. I want to help you through it. I want to help build a scaffold that you can use, and a structure that you can use in order to do your own research, in order to make your own arguments, in order to support your own arguments. So thanks for your time today, and have a wonderful weekend, and don't hesitate to contact me. Take care.